Disclaimer: this story contains mature themes intended for adult viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. The bathroom door hadn't latched properly. That was the only explanation for why I found myself frozen in the hallway, my hand still on the knob, my breath catching somewhere between my throat and my chest. Steam curled out in thick ribbons, carrying the scent of lavender and something sharper, adrenaline, maybe, or the particular electricity that exists between two people who shouldn't be looking at each other this way. He was facing the mirror, water still running, his back to me. The shoulders I'd only ever seen beneath starched cotton were bare now, slick with heat, the line of his spine a question mark I suddenly wanted to answer. When he turned, when he caught my reflection before I could retreat, neither of us moved. The water kept running. My heart kept hammering. And something dangerous passed between us in that humid, impossible silence. I should have apologized. He should have reached for a towel. Instead, his eyes found mine in the glass, dark and unblinking, and I felt it everywhere. The slow burn of being truly seen, stripped of every polite pretense we'd maintained for months across dinner tables and borrowed tools and neighborly waves. My fingers tightened on the doorframe. His hand lifted, not to cover himself, but to brace against the sink, as if he needed the support. The gesture felt like an invitation I couldn't name and shouldn't accept. Sorry, I finally whispered, but my feet didn't move backward. My voice didn't sound sorry at all. He didn't speak. The steam beaded on his skin, and I watched one drop trace the hollow of his collarbone, and I hated myself for noticing. I hated that my mouth had gone dry. I hated that when he finally turned slowly, deliberately, giving me every chance to leave, I stayed. "The lock's broken," he said. His voice was rougher than I'd ever heard it, stripped of the easy charm he used on everyone else. "Has been for weeks." Weeks. He'd known. He'd known, and he hadn't fixed it. I understood then, with a clarity that made my knees weak, that some doors stay broken on purpose. That some accidents are just waiting to happen. And that the man standing 3 feet away, water cooling on his skin, had been waiting for me longer than I wanted to admit I'd been waiting for him. Outside, I heard my husband's car pull into the driveway. The sound should have sent me running. Instead, I watched his hand extend toward me, not touching, not yet, just offering, and I realized with terrible certainty that whatever was starting here wouldn't end with an apology and averted eyes. Some mistakes you make because you have to. Because the alternative is wondering what might have happened if you'd only been brave enough to stay. The front door opened downstairs. His fingers curled, waiting. And I stepped inside. The sound of my husband calling my name from downstairs barely registered. What registered was the way he stepped closer, close enough that the steam from the shower clung to my skin too, close enough that I could see the water droplets catching in his dark eyelashes. "The sink," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, rougher than the water running cold now behind him. "It's been leaking. Under the cabinet. I was trying to fix it when he didn't finish. We both knew when. I should have left. I knew I should have left. Instead, I heard myself say, 'Show me.'" The space beneath the bathroom sink was narrow, cramped, designed for pipes and spiders and not for two adults trying to pretend they weren't acutely aware of every inch of space their bodies weren't occupying. He knelt first, his shoulder brushing the cabinet frame, and I knelt beside him, the tile hard and cool through my thin skirt. "The wrench," he said, gesturing to the tools scattered on the floor. "I need to tighten the coupling, but I can't get the angle." My fingers found the metal, still warm from his grip. I handed it to him, and when he reached back to take it, his hand closed over mine instead of the tool. Neither of us corrected the mistake. His palm was calloused, the skin of his fingers rough against my knuckles, and I felt the contact everywhere, shooting up my arm, settling low in my stomach, making my breath shallow and deliberate. "Here," I whispered, finally placing the wrench in his hand, but my fingers trailed slowly, deliberately, against his palm as I withdrew. He went still beneath the sink. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his spine straightened, the way his head turned just enough that I could see the pulse hammering in his throat. "I can't see," he muttered, though the lighting was fine. "Can you hold the flashlight?" I leaned in, my chest pressing against his back as I reached around him, my phone's light trembling in my grip. The position was absurd, intimate, my chin nearly resting on his shoulder, my breath stirring the damp hair at his nape. He smelled like soap and something uniquely him, something I'd caught hints of before when passing in the driveway, when our hands brushed exchanging borrowed sugar or mail. Now it surrounded me, filled the small dark space, made my head swim. "Left," he instructed, his voice strained. "A little higher." I adjusted, and my wrist grazed his ribs. He inhaled sharply, and I felt the expansion of his chest against mine. The wrench scraped metal. Neither of us spoke. The flashlight beam wavered, not from my hand but from my breathing, which had gone ragged and loud in the confined space. I could feel the heat radiating from his bare back through my thin camisole, could count the freckles on his shoulder I'd never been close enough to see before, could watch a single bead of water trace from his hairline down the column of his neck and disappear into the hollow I dreamed about touching. "Got it," he said, but he didn't move. Neither did I. The flashlight illuminated nothing but his hands, still gripping the wrench, knuckles white. I watched a drop of water fall from his jaw and land on my knee, darkening the fabric of my skirt. We both stared at it, the small wet spot spreading, and I felt his body shift, just barely, just enough that his hip pressed against my thigh. "Your husband," he started, but he didn't finish the thought. Didn't need to. I knew. We both knew. The footsteps on the stairs, the voice calling my name again, closer now. Reality crashing into the humid, impossible bubble we'd created beneath a leaking sink. I pulled back so fast I nearly hit my head on the cabinet, scrambling to my feet, my face burning, my hands shaking. He rose slower, turning to face me, and the look in his eyes, dark, hungry, furious with restraint, made my mouth go dry. I stammered, backing toward the door. "I'll let you finish." I fled. But in the hallway mirror, I saw him lift his hand to his shoulder, to the place where my chin had rested, and press his palm there like a brand. Like a promise. Like something neither of us could undo. The storm had been building all evening, distant thunder that finally cracked open the sky around midnight, taking the power with it. I found myself standing in the hallway in darkness, a candle in my hand, wearing nothing but the thin cotton robe I'd thrown on when the lights died. I told myself I was checking the breaker. I knew I was listening for him. His door was open. Not wide, just a gap, spilling candlelight into the corridor. I should have walked past. I should have gone back to the empty bedroom where my husband was working late at the office, where the sheets were cold and the storm rattled the windows like something trying to get in. "Can't sleep." His voice came from the shadows, rough, intimate in the way that voices become when the world goes dark. I stepped inside before I could stop myself. He was sitting on the edge of his bed, elbows on knees, head in his hands. The candle on his nightstand threw his shadow huge and wavering against the wall. When he looked up, his eyes were red-rimmed, something broken in them I hadn't seen before. "My sister called," he said, though I hadn't asked. "She's sick. The kind of sick that doesn't get better." His hands were shaking. I needed to not be alone with that knowledge for a minute. I crossed the room before my mind caught up with my body. The floorboards creaked. The candle flickered. I sat beside him, close enough that my knee pressed against his thigh, close enough that I could feel the heat rolling off his skin through his thin t-shirt. "I'm here," I whispered, and the words felt like surrender. He turned his head. In the candlelight, his face was all planes and shadows, beautiful and wrecked. "You shouldn't be." But he didn't move away. His hand found the edge of the bed between us, his pinky finger stretching until it touched mine. The contact was electric, devastating, the smallest touch carrying the weight of everything we weren't saying. The thunder rolled closer. The rain lashed the windows. I watched his throat work as he swallowed, watched his gaze drop to my mouth and linger there until I felt it like a physical pressure, like his lips were already on mine. I leaned in, just barely, just enough that I could feel his breath, warm and uneven, mixing with my own. Our noses brushed. My hand lifted, hovering in the air between us, wanting to touch his face, to trace the tear tracks I could barely see, to anchor myself to something solid before I drifted entirely into this madness. "Tell me to stop," he breathed against my mouth. His hand had found my waist, not pulling, just resting there, his thumb tracing the belt of my robe through the fabric, back and forth, hypnotic, devastating. "Tell me to stop and I will." I couldn't speak. My lips parted, but no sound came out. I could taste him in the air between us, soap and skin and something desperate. His forehead dropped to mine, our breath shared, our hearts audible in the silence, pounding out the rhythm of a song we both knew the words to but hadn't dared sing. The candle guttered. His hand tightened on my waist. And for one infinite, impossible moment, we hung there on the edge of a precipice, trembling, burning, knowing that one shift, one breath, one whispered yes would send us falling. The front door opened downstairs. My husband's voice, calling my name, confused by the darkness. We flew apart. His hand left my waist like he'd been burned. I stood so fast the room spun, the candle nearly toppling, my robe slipping from one shoulder that his eyes fixed on with a hunger that made me ache. I pulled it up, backing away, my fingers pressed to lips that still felt his breath, still tasted the almost kiss that hung in the humid air between us like a promise of ruin. I stammered, already at the door. "I know," he said, but his voice was wrecked, and when I looked back from the hallway, he was staring at his hands like they belonged to a stranger, like they'd just committed a crime he couldn't take back. I found him in the garage, slamming tools into his toolbox with enough force to crack the metal. The sound echoed in the small space, sharp and final. I shouldn't have come. I knew I shouldn't have come. But 3 days of silence, of passing in doorways with averted eyes, of feeling his breath still ghosting across my lips in every quiet moment, it had unraveled something in me. "You need to stop," I said, my voice too loud in the confined space. He didn't turn. His shoulders bunched under his thin white t-shirt, muscles coiled with restraint. "Stop what, exactly?" "This. Whatever this is." Looking at me like I couldn't finish. My hands were shaking. "My husband is your friend. He trusts you. He trusts me." He laughed, but it came out broken, bitter. He spun around, and the force of his movement made me step back, my spine hitting the workbench behind me. Trust. He advanced one step, then another, until he was close enough that I could smell engine oil and sweat, and something uniquely him that had haunted my sheets for nights. "You think this is about trust? You think I chose this? To want my friend's wife so badly I can't fucking breathe. Don't." My voice cracked. "Don't say it out loud." "Why not?" Another step. His hands found the workbench on either side of me, caging me in, his body radiating heat and fury. "Because it makes it real. Because then you have to admit you've been standing in doorways on purpose. That you've been wearing that perfume." He leaned in, his nose brushing my hair, inhaling deeply, his exhale ragged against my temple. "This fucking perfume that makes me want to put my mouth on your throat and never stop." I shoved his chest. It was meant to push him away, but my fingers curled into his shirt instead, gripping, pulling. "You're ruining everything," I spat, but my voice was breathless, ruined already. "Good," he growled, and his forehead dropped to mine, heavy, desperate. "Ruin it with me. Ruin me." We were breathing the same air, hot and damp in the unventilated garage. My robe had come loose, I didn't remember when, and his gaze dropped to the gap in the fabric, to the skin exposed there, and the look in his eyes was feral, starving. "Tell me you don't want this," he demanded, his voice scraping raw. "Tell me you haven't been dreaming about my hands on you, and I'll walk away right now. I'll fix the fucking lock. I'll move out. Tell me." I opened my mouth to lie. To save us both. Nothing came out. His hand lifted, trembling, and hovered over my collarbone, not touching, just feeling the heat radiating from my skin. I watched his throat work, watched the war in his eyes between decency and desire, watched him lose. One word, he breathed, his lips so close to mine I could taste the coffee on his breath, feel the vibration of his voice against my mouth. One word and I stop. I didn't speak. I leaned in, just barely, just enough that my lower lip brushed his upper one, a ghost of contact that made us both freeze, made the air leave the room, made the world narrow to the millimeter of space between salvation and sin. His hand finally touched my skin, his palm spreading across my collarbone, his thumb pressing into the hollow of my throat where my pulse hammered wild and betraying. "Please," I whispered, and I didn't know what I was begging for him to stop, for him to continue, for the earth to open and swallow us before we destroyed everything. His fingers tightened. His lips parted. The garage door rumbled, the automatic opener engaging, my husband's car pulling into the driveway, headlights sweeping through the high windows, illuminating us in stark, unforgiving light. We didn't move. We couldn't. His hand was still on my throat, my fingers still twisted in his shirt, our mouths a breath apart, the lie of innocence shattered by the light streaming over us. I heard the car door open. Heard my husband's footsteps on the gravel. "Choose," he breathed against my lips, the word barely audible. Everything and nothing, the question I'd been running from since the bathroom door failed to latch. Right now. Choose. The kitchen had never felt so small. 3 days since the garage, since headlights had saved us from ourselves, and now we were trapped in the mundane hell of morning coffee, acting like strangers who had never shared breath, never hovered on the edge of ruin. I stood at the counter, cracking eggs with too much force, the shells fragmenting into the bowl. He sat at the table, newspaper rustling with aggressive normalcy, neither of us acknowledging that the space between us was alive, humming, dangerous. "Sleep well?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Fine, I lied. I hadn't slept. I'd stared at the ceiling, feeling his thumb still pressed against my throat, hearing his whispered chews on repeat until dawn grayed the windows. "You." Like a baby. The paper snapped. He wasn't reading. I could see his eyes fixed on the same paragraph, unblinking, for 10 minutes. I turned, eggs forgotten, leaning against the counter to study him. He looked wrecked, shadows under his eyes, jaw tight, the column of his throat working as he swallowed coffee he wasn't tasting. Our eyes met. The newspaper crumpled in his grip. Something electric passed between us, the memory of almost, the hunger of interrupted, and I felt my face flush, my hands find the edge of the counter behind me for support. "You should probably," I started. "Yeah," he cut in, standing too fast, the chair scraping loud against tile. "I should go. Fix that lock." Finally. We both knew he wouldn't. We'd been avoiding the broken lock for weeks, preserving the excuse, the possibility, the lie that we were just neighbors, just friends, just innocent. The knock at the back door made us both jump. My sister's voice, bright and oblivious, calling through the glass, "Morning." I brought muffins. Panic flashed across his face, mirrored in my own. We were standing too close, breathing too hard, the atmosphere in the kitchen thick enough to choke on. I gestured frantically toward the pantry. He slipped inside just as the door opened, my sister bustling in with her usual hurricane energy, her eyes already too sharp, too knowing. She set the muffins down, her gaze drifting to the 2 coffee cups on the table, the crumpled newspaper, the absolute silence from the pantry where a grown man was hiding like a teenager. "Just me," I said, my voice too high. "Couldn't sleep. Early morning." She tilted her head, studying me with the brutal intuition of shared childhood. "You're flushed. It's hot. It's 60 degrees. She moved toward the pantry. "Do you have any?" "No." I stepped in front of her, too fast, too desperate. "I mean, it's a mess. Organization project. You know how I get." Her eyes narrowed. She knew exactly how I got. She also knew I'd never organized anything in my life. Behind me, from the pantry, came the smallest sound, a floorboard creaking under shifting weight. My sister's gaze snapped to the door, then back to me, understanding dawning in terrible, excruciating slow motion. "Oh," she said, soft, devastating. "Oh, honey." "It's not," I started, but the lie died on my lips. The pantry door opened. He stepped out, shame and defiance warring in his posture, his hands raised in surrender or apology. I couldn't tell. "Morning, Sarah," he said, his voice gravel rough. My sister looked between us, the 2 coffee cups, the crumpled newspaper, the absolute disaster of our faces. "Your husband," she said carefully, "is parking his car right now." I passed him on the street. The floor dropped out from under me. He went pale, swaying on his feet. And my sister, my brilliant, terrible sister, reached for the muffin bag with deliberate slowness, her eyes never leaving mine. "You have about 45 seconds," she said, "to decide what story you're telling. And whether the man you almost destroyed your marriage for is worth actually destroying it." She stepped back onto the porch, pulling the door closed with a soft click that sounded like a gunshot. We stood in the sudden silence, the 3 of us now, me, him, and the truth we couldn't outrun anymore. His hand found mine, fingers threading through with desperate, guilty pressure. "Tell me what to do," he breathed. But I didn't know. For the first time, standing in the wreckage of almost, I didn't know which choice would destroy me more. The kitchen clock ticked loud in the silence, each second my husband's footsteps closer on the gravel drive. My sister's warning hung in the air, 45 seconds to choose a story, a life, a version of myself that could survive this morning. His hand was still in mine, calloused fingers pressing desperate patterns into my palm, the same hands that had fixed my leaky sink, that had almost touched me in ways that would have burned us both alive. I looked at him. Really looked. The red-rimmed eyes from his sister's phone call, the tremor in his hands when he thought I wasn't watching, the way he'd waited in doorways for weeks, preserving the broken lock like a prayer. He had never asked me to leave my husband. He had only ever asked me to be honest about wanting him. "Go," I whispered, and his face crumpled, devastation raw and immediate. But I was already moving, pulling him through the back door, into the morning chill, into the narrow space between the garage and the fence where we'd hidden as children stealing cigarettes, where the world couldn't see us. His back pressed against the siding, my hands fisted in his shirt, and I kissed him, not the almost kiss of the garage, not the breath-shared hovering of the candlelit bedroom, but real, devastating, his mouth opening under mine with a sound like surrender. I felt the moment he broke, his arms crushing me against him, his hands finally learning the shape of me, my waist, the curve of my hip, the small of my back where his palms spread possessive and claiming. He tasted like coffee and desperation, and the end of everything I'd known. When we broke apart, gasping, his forehead rested against mine, our breath mingling white in the cold air. "My husband," I started. "Is parking his car," he finished, his thumb tracing my lower lip, swollen now, marked. "I know. I can't, I won't," I struggled for the words, for the truth that had been building since the bathroom door failed to latch. "I can't promise you anything clean. Or right. Or simple." He laughed, broken and beautiful. "When have we ever been simple?" The back door opened. My sister's voice, too loud, covering, "There you are." I dropped a muffin. She stopped, seeing us, seeing my mouth, his hands still on my waist. Her expression shifted from shock to something softer, something knowing. 45 seconds, she said again, but this time it sounded like permission. He didn't let go. His fingers tightened, his eyes searching mine for the final answer to the question he'd breathed against my lips in the garage. "Choose." I chose. I turned in his arms, facing the kitchen where my husband's footsteps now sounded on the porch, where the life I'd built waited with its trust and its assumptions and its quiet, comfortable death. I felt him behind me, solid, warm, the man I'd moaned for in dreams, whose calloused hands had haunted my empty sheets. "You can watch," I whispered, repeating the words from the title I'd written in my journal weeks ago, the fantasy I'd never dared speak, or you can touch. His belt buckle clicked in the narrow space between garage and fence. His mouth found my throat, my shoulder, the place where my robe had slipped. And when I arched back against him, gasping, I saw my husband's reflection in the kitchen window, frozen on the threshold, seeing everything, understanding finally what had been growing in the humid spaces between his absence and his neighbor's patient. Devastating presence. I didn't know if he'd follow me in or walk away. But the moment his reflection blurred, when he turned from the window rather than toward it, I felt the stranger's hands become my choice, my consequence, my beginning. The belt unbuckling behind me wasn't a stranger's anymore. It was mine. It was his. It was the only honest thing left in a house full of broken locks and almosts and waiting.